Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my running back trade targets for week 3 of the 2022 fantasy football season. Now, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about 8 running backs who are currently buy low candidates. Some of these players were drafted in the first rounds of your respective fantasy football leagues, while others are lower value players that have potential going forward. But the main reason I wanted to go ahead and talk about trade targets at the running back position is because at the beginning of every single fantasy year, there's always an overreaction to early performances. Let's go back and look at last season's performances from weeks 1 through 2. Jonathan Taylor was the number 27 overall running back in a half PPR scoring format within the first 2 weeks of the 2021 year. At this time last year, we had a similar video saying, hey, go trade for Jonathan Taylor because he is going to be unleashed and he's going to find success because we know he's an RB1 talent. And we want to go ahead and invest in players that are in that capacity or have the ability to reach that level. Now, Jonathan Taylor wasn't the only running back to start slow last year. You go and you look at James Conner. He was outside of the top 40 in terms of the first 2 weeks of fantasy point production. Leonard Fournette was outside of the top 30. Yet both these guys finished within the top 6 running back rankings at the end of 2021. Even Javonte Williams to the right of me at the beginning of the 2021 year was the number 44 overall running back. Many were panicking because we went ahead and drafted him, assuming he was going to be the immediate standout back for the Denver Broncos. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, but going into this year, we have seen the trend. We've seen the snaps, the touches go in his direction. We'll talk about him at an extended rate more, but I'm just giving you guys an idea. You want to go after these players because your league mates are scrambling, they're panicking, they're 0-2, and they're thinking, how do I go ahead and get myself out of this hole? Fantasy football is a marathon. You don't want to take 1 or 2 performances and overreact. So let's go ahead and let's talk about these running backs, beginning with Javonte Williams. At this current moment in time, he's the number 15 overall fantasy running back. In week 1, he put up 14.3 half PPR points. In week 2, he put up 9 points. A total of 23.3 in 2 weeks. Looks very similar to his numbers from last year, considering he finished as the number 17 overall back. But in comparison, there are a lot of things to like about Javonte Williams going forward in comparison to what we saw last season. First and foremost is the distribution of opportunity and snaps from him and Melvin Gordon. Last season, with Melvin Gordon in the lineup, he was handling only 44.65% of the offensive touches, while this year, it's at 57%. Now, when we look at last year's snap counts with Melvin Gordon, he was only playing 48.9%. This year, it's 62%. Overall, the numbers continue to creep in the direction of Javonte Williams. And as long as he continues to garner touches on the ground and a lot of opportunity through the air, again, in week 1, 12 targets, 11 receptions. Obviously, those numbers dipped mightily in week 2. But as long as the potential is there for Javonte Williams to be a premier receiving back in this offense, his overall fantasy value continues to grow. I mean, when you look at the amount of touches he had last year in comparison to this year, already we're seeing a 13% jump in terms of total touches in this offense. If you want to jump his overall fantasy point production by 13%, we're getting a running back who is easily going to be amongst the top 12 at the end of the 2022 year. Get him while you can, because let's be honest, in the first 2 weeks of the season, he should have already had 2 touchdowns within his score line. But due to circumstance, wasn't able to score. Week 1, fumbled on the 1-yard line. Could have had himself a 20-point performance in that week. Week 2, wide open with no defenders within 5 yards of him, ready for an open pass on the goal line. Russell Wilson throws it in the complete opposite direction, out of bounds. Ultimately, there's a lot of potential here. We're talking about a running back who has top 10 upside, even with the presence of Melvin Gordon in this backfield. We're absolutely investing in Javonte Williams. You should be targeting him in upcoming trades. Now, before we move on to the next running back on today's list, I want to remind you guys, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2022 season with the singular goal of trying to help you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. So go ahead and do that. Click the like button down below. Would greatly appreciate your guys' support. Also, be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. Again, whether you want to play more fantasy football via higher or lower pick'ems, potentially drafting their battle royales, their Thursday night contests. Again, for those of you who don't have players in tonight's Thursday night contest, you could potentially go ahead, put together a pick'em slip between the Cleveland Browns and Pittsburgh Steelers and find a lot of success picking higher or lower on a given player statistic. If you go ahead and travel to the description of the video and click on the link and use promo code Andrew when you sign up today, when you make a first-time deposit, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. So check that out. Support the channel in that way. Of course, there's a lot of pick'ems higher or lower that you can go ahead and take advantage of tonight. Some of these numbers really do look spicy for us. The quarterback play, we're expecting a defensively heavy matchup, a lot of running in these games. Should be pretty fun between these two teams. So go ahead and check that out today. There's a link down in the description. Thank you very much for the support. Let's go ahead and move on to the next running back. For those of you who have overreacted on the first two games of Dalvin Cook, I'm here to, settle it out and make you feel more confident about not trading him away. And for those of you who have an opportunity to potentially trade for him, you should absolutely go after that. Obviously, in week 1, he had himself a pretty good game. 20 rushing attempts, over 90 rushing yards, wasn't able to get himself a rushing touchdown, but that's not a big deal. That happens for the running back position. But over the course of the history of Dalvin Cook's career with the Minnesota Vikings, when Kirk Cousins has been under center, he's been a fantastic running back. We're talking about a guy that's been averaging over 19 fantasy points per game while with the Minnesota Vikings over the last 3+ years. Now, when we get into the conversation of what we can anticipate from him rest of season, I'm expecting to see those numbers. I'm expecting him to get into that top 10 running back category because going forward, the opportunity is going to be there and the skill is obviously there. This is an offense that is going to take steps forward. And even though that Monday night game against the Philadelphia Eagles seemed like this offense took a couple steps back, that's primetime Kirk Cousins for you. Really, making it difficult for us overall. Throughout the entirety of that game, Dalvin Cook had 6 rushing attempts. In his entire career in the National Football League, since he was drafted out of Florida State, this man has never had 6 or fewer rushing attempts in a singular game. That's the first time he's ever experienced that. I don't think that's going to happen anytime ever again. We've even heard Kevin O'Connell come out and say we need to continue to utilize Dalvin Cook more within this offense, and I 100% believe that they're going to do so. So before you end up missing the window of opportunity to go ahead and trade for Dalvin Cook, right now is the moment. Again, they play against the Detroit Lions this week. Just putting it in perspective, besides the fact that the Detroit Lions are the worst run defense in the National Football League, when Dalvin Cook has played against them since 2019, he's averaged 26.7 fantasy points per game in the 3 contests that he's played against them. In those games, he's been given 21.7 rushing attempts that has led to 136.7 rushing yards per game, 1.7 touchdowns per game against that defense. A lot of success since 2019 against the Detroit Lions. And even his backup, Alexander Mattison, in the last 3 games that he started against the Detroit Lions, over the course of the last 3 years, he has averaged 22.7 rushing attempts, 99.3 rushing yards, 1.3 touchdowns per game, and 23.6 fantasy points per game in a half-point PPR scoring format. There's a lot of success to be had here. Get Dalvin Cook on your roster before it's too late. All right, let's go ahead and let's start talking about Austin Ekeler. As of right now, he's in a very similar situation as Dalvin Cook. He was drafted highly, and though he hasn't been able to perform at an incredible level like we saw late last season, there's still a lot of upside to be had with Austin Ekeler. I know you may be disappointed having taken him within the first 5 selections of your draft, especially considering what you've seen the likes of, Cooper Kupp be able to put up. But as of this moment, we have to take a couple things into account. He hasn't scored a single touchdown thus far. And that's going to be the same case as Javonte Williams and Dalvin Cook. Once these running backs begin to get an influx of touchdowns, their value is going to be untouchable, and you're not going to want to trade them because they're helping you win weeks. Now, in week 1, very easily could have scored a touchdown against the Las Vegas Raiders. Of course, the fullback caught a touchdown in an I formation, no big deal. In week 2, against Kansas City Chiefs, even though they threw the ball to the fullback, he wasn't even in that formation. There's opportunities going forward that we're going to see Austin Ekeler have on the goal line, and they're going to hand it to him. And whether that ends up being a 1-yard punch-in or potentially in future weeks a 20-yard rush for a touchdown, eventually it's all going to rack up for Austin Ekeler. Now, a couple things I wanted to mention. At the beginning of the 2021 year, weeks 1 and 2, he had 33 total touches out of this backfield. In comparison to this year, where he already has 41 touches out of this backfield. In terms of a comparison, they're utilizing Austin Ekeler far more than they did last year. Yet, despite that being true, a lot of fantasy managers are beginning to panic because they're thinking, man, Sony Michel, Joshua Kelly, the fullback, Horvath is beginning to get more opportunity in this offense, which is diminishing the value of Austin Ekeler. Though you may think that's the case, he's getting far more touches than he ever has. And the primary reason he's able to get even more touches despite more utilization out of this backfield is because they're running the ball more as an offense. Last season, weeks 1 and 2, this team gave their running backs 52 total touches in comparison to this year so far, 64 total touches. If Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator, is going to try to build a Saints-related offense, similar to the way that I mentioned all offseason, they used Austin Ekeler last year like they did, Alvin Kamara in 2020 with the New Orleans Saints. If there's going to be, comparisons in that regard, I anticipate Sony Michel and Joshua Kelly to be the Latavius Murray or Mark Ingram of this offense. When they played with the New Orleans Saints, they were used as a running back that can, get 3 yards in a cloud of dust and keep it moving. But ultimately, it is Austin Ekeler's offense and it is his backfield. And I expect him to get a lot of utilization. If he was able to put, a touchdown in each of these last 2 performances, we'd have no complaints at all. I expect those numbers to eventually get there. And when they do, you're not going to regret trading for Austin Ekeler and getting him on your team. He's currently the number 16 overall ranked running back, and he hasn't scored a touchdown. Just imagine when he does. Moving on, let's talk about Derrick Henry, the Tennessee Titans running back. I'm going to go ahead and propose a question. What do you think is more likely to happen in the coming weeks? The entire Tennessee Titans offense falls apart and they completely ditch running the ball. Or the alternative is the Tennessee Titans offense completely buys into only running the ball and they begin to give Derrick Henry 25 to 30 touches per game on the ground. Now, in my opinion, I'm thinking the latter is most likely going to come true. Because from what we saw last year, weeks 1 through 8, let's think about the rushing attempt opportunities that Derrick Henry saw. Last season, 17, 35, 28, 33, 29, 20, 29, 28. That's the first 8 weeks of the season last year. I'm expecting those numbers to reappear quite soon, if not this week against the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, already this season, 21 rushing attempts and 13. The 13 rushing attempts was on Monday night against the Buffalo Bills, in which they pretty much benched their starters midway through the third quarter. Because again, it was no longer a contest. They wanted to go ahead and keep them ready for future weeks, because this is not a team that is just going to turn over and say, you know what, our season's over. This is a team that was the number one squad in the AFC. They had the bye week last year going into the NFL playoffs. I expect the Tennessee Titans to get back on track. Derrick Henry right now is the number 29 overall running back in fantasy football, a similar position as to where Jonathan Taylor was last year, and it only took a streak of performances to get him back on track and at the top of the list. I'm expecting Derrick Henry to do exactly that. Get the opportunity on the ground, and despite the fact that this offensive line is a downgrade from last year, and the offense as a whole, in terms of their passing threat, is also taking a little bit of a step back, when you give this man 30 rushing attempts, he is eventually going to break one out. I'm expecting Derrick Henry to be a great option. That's why I'm going after him. Let's move on to Josh Jacobs. As of right now, the main thing that keeps me excited about Josh Jacobs' potential future value is mainly the success that we have seen over his young career. Since 2019, Josh Jacobs has averaged 13 plus fantasy points per game within the Raiders offense. When he is healthy, he is a fantastic running back. Yet in the first 2 weeks of the season, for those of you who have been contributed, 7.8 and 8.6 fantasy points in the first 2 weeks, 16.4 total half PPR fantasy points from Josh Jacobs, you may be feeling like, man, did I really make the right investment by drafting Josh Jacobs? And I'm going to go ahead and flat out tell you, yes, you did. You made the right investment. It's just a matter of time until he's able to really get unlocked and those rushing touchdowns begin to rack up within this Las Vegas Raiders offense. Let's put this in perspective. There have only been 4 rushing attempts given to running backs outside of Josh Jacobs. He is by far and away the RB1 of this team. It is no questions asked. Now, this last week against the Arizona Cardinals, we saw Josh Jacobs find a lot of success, and then we saw the Las Vegas Raiders completely ditch the running game. So let's talk about this. At the beginning of the game, the first drive, the Las Vegas Raiders spent 9 minutes and 38 seconds to go down the field and score a touchdown. 9 minutes and 38 seconds on a singular drive. Throughout the 16 plays of that drive, we saw Josh Jacobs run the ball 8 times. 50% of the plays that they ran was handing it off to Josh Jacobs. Now, at the end of the first half, the score of that game was 20-0, Las Vegas leading. At home, they go into the second half and they only ran the ball with Josh Jacobs a total of 7 times. When you're up 20-0 and you ran the ball only 7 times in that second half, that is a lack of commitment from the head coach. And it wasn't a lack of production because they were able to get yardage. But unfortunately, they didn't commit to the run and they allowed the Arizona Cardinals to come back and beat them. I expect that not to be the case in future weeks. We expect Josh Jacobs, when this team to take leads, to run the ball effectively and continue to give him touches to bleed the clock and dominate possessions, because that's exactly what they did at the beginning of the game. They went on a 9 minute and 38 second drive. I have a lot of confidence that Josh Jacobs, this entire Raiders offense, is going to get back on track going forward. That's why he's on this list. Moving on, we have J.K. Dobbins. Listen, I think J.K. Dobbins, once he's healthy and he comes back, he is by far and away going to be the running back that is never taken off the field for his respective offense. I don't see a possibility in which Kenyon Drake, Justice Hill, or Mike Davis could take away any touches from him. The production in which we saw from those 3 running backs that I just mentioned as of the first 2 weeks have combined for 29 rushing attempts, 74 rushing yards. That's a 2.55 yard per carry average. Absolutely pathetic. 3 targets, 3 receptions, 22 receiving yards, and only 11.1 half PPR fantasy points within 3 running backs for the first 2 games. In fact, just going back to last week's contest against Miami, they handed off the ball to Mike Davis on the 1 yard line multiple times in a row, and he was stuffed. I don't think that's going to happen to a J.K. Dobbins, because what this team has done is they've approached his ACL injury the right way. They didn't just force him to come back and force him into the game. They're waiting until he gets multiple weeks of full practice under his belt, until he feels confidence with his knee to make all the cuts, all the moves, so that when they give him 12, 13, 15 rushing attempts in a singular game, he's up for the task at hand. I'm expecting when J.K. Dobbins to come back to be absolutely unleashed and to be able to be a running back that is just immediately finding success within this offense, because there's no other running back competition to take touches away from him. Lamar Jackson's going to get his rushing attempts, and of course they're going to throw the ball, but as long as J.K. Dobbins is going to be the 3-down back for this team, I'm expecting a lot of value. Let's move on to the next running back, Alvin Kamara. Again, Alvin Kamara has been dealing with an injury, and even though the injury has been the main reason as to why he hasn't produced, many people look at Alvin Kamara and the fact that he's the number 61 overall running back as of right now in terms of total fantasy points, and they think, man, I've already hit the dud. My season's over. Guys, week 1 was just a matter of circumstance. He was injured, dealing with the rib cartilage injury. We've seen other players miss significant time with said injury. A lot of, pain management in that regard. But there's also the conversation of, hey, Taysom Hill was able to score a rushing touchdown in that game. There are not going to be weekly opportunities for Taysom Hill to completely annihilate Alvin Kamara's value. And though you may have seen that in week 1, and you may be overreacting to those overall opportunities, I can understand it. But you have to look at it the perspective of, we're talking about a running back who not only has extreme value on the ground, but through the air. He is game script proof. Whether they're up 30 or down 30, he's going to be in the game getting touches. Not only that, Alvin Kamara has been a top 12 fantasy running back in a half PPR scoring format for his entire career. Since 2017, he's always been in that conversation, whether he's had injuries in years or not. He's always going to be in that conversation. And the fact that a lot of people are overreacting, a lot of people are selling Alvin Kamara for quite cheap, in fact. The fantasy value you have to give in order to receive Alvin Kamara in a trade is lower than it's ever been in Alvin Kamara's career. This is the best time to invest in another one of these running backs who has first round upside, top 12 upside at the position. Go after him, get him on your squad. The final back I wanted to mention is Rhamondre Stevenson. Again, Rhamondre Stevenson is someone I do not want to give up on. I know how much value there is in this New England Patriots backfield, and I especially know how much value there is for a guy that is going to be a 3-down back for this team. With Ty Montgomery on the injured reserve, in the next couple weeks, they're going to continue to give Rhamondre Stevenson 60+% of the offensive snaps. And when he's running 15+ routes per game, they're obviously going to get him more utilized in the receiving game. And once they do, his value in itself, separate from Damian Harris and the amount of touches he gets, is going to be sustainable enough to be a flex option on your roster. Because we know this team, when they get down to the goal line, are looking to run the ball. Hunter Henry has been absolutely invisible thus far this season. And as long as we're getting into the conversation of a running back who's averaging over 4.7 yards per carry as of thus far this season, and is in the conversation of getting far more targets in the upcoming weeks, I'm expecting Rhamondre Stevenson to be a player that you don't have to specifically go out and grab. I mean, again, you very easily could. He's only put up 9 fantasy points thus far this season. You could very easily make another trade and someone, tacks on Rhamondre Stevenson at the back end of that trade in order to make it even, and you're getting a player plus Rhamondre Stevenson. He's a project piece. You want him on roster because over time, he's going to find value. And if, in fact, there's a scenario in which Damian Harris, like he did last week, goes down with an injury, I know he said he's fine, but if there's a possibility where he goes down, Rhamondre Stevenson very easily becomes a 15+ point fantasy point contributor every single week because of his 3-down potential upside in comparison to what Damian Harris potentially provides right now, playing 40% of the snaps and only running the ball out of this backfield. All right, that's going to cover it for today's video. These are the 8 running backs that I wanted to mention as potential trade targets for week 3 of the 2022 fantasy football season. Again, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the like button down below. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. Are there other running backs that you're looking to potentially buy low on? What offers are you making to other fantasy managers in your league? Let's go ahead as a community, help each other out, figure out what exactly we can do to acquire some of these talents, because I know, having watched every single one of the games that these players have played, it's been far more the circumstance of the situation rather than their skill. Dalvin Cook, even though he was completely nullified on Monday night, I watched that game twice, once live and once after the fact. Their offensive line just could not get the job done. But I can assure you that the upcoming schedule and what they're going to face, man, there's so much value to be had. You could even trade for him, watch the explosion happen, then trade him again. There's a lot of value to be played with. Check these players out. Of course, check out Underdog Fantasy for those of you who are trying to play within the pick'ems tonight, perhaps the Thursday night, contest where you can draft players, compete against others, and win thousands of dollars. You can check that out today. Click the link down in the description. Use promo code Andrew today. When you sign up and make a first-time deposit, you'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100. For those of you interested, check that out. And until next time, we'll be talking about tomorrow's must-start players for week 3. I'll see you guys. Peace.